So we have 45 minutes and 5 panelists to discuss this teeny tiny minor issue of international affairs. So I would start right away. Is Michael with us?
Yes,
So
I am.
Michael, yes, I would start right with you. What do you think? What would an invasion mean from a Chinese perspective? Where does an invasion start?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the conference. And I wish I could have been there in person, but I have another conference tomorrow morning in Taipei, so I can't be in two places at the same time. To answer your question, it's a big question to answer in 2 minutes. Well, first of all, it would mean that the Chinese regime has given up on what it calls peaceful unification. It would also suggest that it has run out of patience and it concludes that it needs to resort to force to bring about a political resolution to the conflict in the Taiwan Strait. It would also suggest that deterrence from Taiwan, from the international community, has also failed. And it would also mean that Beijing has concluded that it finally has sufficient capabilities to act on its intent, and also judges that the geopolitical context in which it decides to take military action against Taiwan is conducive to this type of policy. So there needs to be several stars aligned for that to occur. There are three main scenarios that could lead to an invasion of Taiwan. One is a limited quarantine, which mostly utilizes gray zone operations. Then there could be a naval blockade and an amphibious assault against Taiwan. The first two scenarios could quickly spin out of control and then result in much larger hostilities in the Taiwan Strait, leading to an attempted invasion of Taiwan. Uh, what we're talking about here, an amphibious assault against Taiwan, is the single most challenging type of military operation. This is not something that the Chinese regime and the PLA could take lightly or conclude that it could win easily. There's no such thing as a surprise invasion. We oftentimes see news reports that China, on a whim, could decide to invade Taiwan. That is simply impossible. That would require several months of preparation, from logistics to mobilization, which would be seen by intelligence collection from Taiwan, United States, and other regional countries. So again, there would not be the element of surprise that gives an advantage to an invading force. Um, then the PLA also would have to establish air superiority in the Taiwan Strait before it can launch transport vessels to carry PLA soldiers to Taiwan. Given the military rule of 3-1 for invading forces, that means that the Chinese would need to send at least 160,000 soldiers across the Taiwan Strait to invade Taiwan and then to stabilize Taiwan. So this is a mightily, very, very demanding endeavor and would be further complicated if the United States and other countries like Japan in the region also join Taiwan's side in the defense of Taiwan in an invasion scenario. And finally, once the PLA puts boots on the ground in Taiwan, the Chinese would need to pacify 23.5 million people, most of whom would be opposed to unification by China.
Perception of such invasion.
Um, from a diplomatic point of view, yes. Well, thank you again for me to have the opportunity to join this year's Budapest Forum. From the diplomatic point of view, I would say that, in fact, there has been a preventive diplomacy going on, at least for the past 1 year. 5 days ago, Germany, for the first time in the past more than 1 decade, sent a naval ship passing through Taiwan Strait. And it's not Germany is not the only country doing this. I mean, the U.S., UK, Netherlands, Canada, France have all sent naval ship to pass through Taiwan Strait in the past couple of months as a way to demonstrate that the Taiwan Strait is more than just the international water. Also, we have to stick to this principle of freedom of navigations, And Taiwanese people, Taiwanese government, we all abide by such international norms. And also, I think what behind those joint military action was to send a clear signal to the Chinese leaders that don't do unsmart moves on Taiwan or don't rock the boat in the Taiwan Strait, because it's not just a matter between Taiwan and China. It's going to have a huge global implications. So from a diplomatic point of view, I think Taiwan government in the past more than 2 years when we are facing constant and daily Chinese military, naval, Air Force, you name it, harassment to our border and also the middle line of Taiwan Straits. But Taiwanese side have been working all kinds of way with the like-minded international actors to make sure that there's a unified voice in the international community to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. In fact, if you check the past records, including the most recent strategic dialogue between US and EU in Brussels just a couple of days ago, in the joint statement, both US and EU all agree and they all urge China to refrain from, to show some restraint in the Taiwan Straits. So I think, and also judging by the past series of joint statements made by G7 or US, Korea, US, Japan, US, Philippines summits, they all come up with one essential point in their joint statement: peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. In that regard, I don't believe anybody will point their finger at Taiwan. It's China that has been constantly rocking the boat.
Thank you. Dr. Wu, a couple of minutes ago, Dr. Koh said that there is no such thing as a surprise invasion. As a defense and military expert, what signs of military preparations do you see, not only between China and Taiwan, but in the broader region?
Yes, it's my privilege to be invited here. Actually, from a military perspective, as you can see, from Taiwan itself, we are building up our military capability by pouring more defense budget. Also, we also try to improve our stockpile of all those weapons. Also, we have created our indigenous defense industry. All those things are prepared for the worst. Of course, we hope it will not happen. But by looking at other side about Japan, so Japan also raised their defense spend budget GDP. It's up to their target will be about 2.0% of the GDP. And also they acquired a longer range strike missile like a Tomahawk from the US, which is very, very different from what they have before, which means they are prepared for the worst case, which is China's invasion once it occurs in the region. But also going down to the South China Sea, as you can see currently happen is the conflict between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea about a territorial dispute. And you can tell that China tried to use their maritime forces, including Malaysia, Coast Guard, and POA navies, to push and try to coerce those neighboring countries, including Philippines and Vietnam, to give up their so-called sovereignty rights to China, which is not correct. It has been denied by the International Court in 2016. So Philippines right now, with the help from the US, also they are established the airfield and the seaport construct of that. I just got a news that the US going to help the Philippines to build a Navy port, starting the project. So all the signs just demonstrate that all the nations around, especially on the first island chain, we are preparing for the China's invasion if that did happen. Of course, we don't want it. We hope it will not. But you need to show your threats, your determination to protect your country, to protect your democracy and freedom. So that's the preparedness right now. Of course, up there's South Korea. That's a different kind of thing, since South Korea are facing North Korea threat with the nuclear capabilities. But once China launched a strike, North Korea, at this point, definitely will be alongside with China. So that will shape the whole security environment in the region. So up to now, everybody is prepared and hope for the best that it will not happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it might worth to zoom out a bit of this region. Dr. Karásková, what do you think? How is the international community preparing for such event? I know it's a huge question, but it's your field of expertise. So.
Thank you for the great question. It's a pleasure to be here in Budapest. Thank you for the invitation. I think I will pick up where Dr. Wu just left, because we are discussing this whole region without actually perhaps calling the things as they are. And we are talking about a frozen conflict from the Cold War, but it could be very easily a hot conflict, very, very easily, because we have mutual defense treaties between the US and South Korea, mutual defense treaty between US and Japan, between the US and Australia. We have ANZUS there, so New Zealand as well. If China starts any kind of provocation, the US will have to react. No matter who is in the office, they will basically have to react. Once they react, we would have a fleet, 7th Fleet probably going to the area. And then it may take miscalculation, a incident, incident, which would very easily escalate, and all those mutual defense treaties would be most likely activated. So the risk is very high. It's high from the military perspective. It's high also from the economic perspective, because if we do have severance of sea lines of communication in the area, that would affect everybody. And we are talking about 10 trillion of US dollars in effect. And that would also cost the global GDP by 10%. And that's twice what we have seen during the COVID-19 crisis, combined with global financial crisis. So completely unprecedented, really, really bad economic situation. And I think, back to your question, Lili, and I think that the world is, well, the world, let's say North America, European Union and some other countries and the Asian partners in the region are well aware of this situation. And they are trying to prevent it by show of force, by showing deterrence, by this freedom of navigation excursions, which Ambassador mentioned, done by the German frigate, for example. But is that enough? I'm a little bit skeptical on that front. And as Dr. Wu also mentioned, we are not talking just about this small conflict, which would be done between China and Taipei or Taiwan. We would actually have North Korea most likely utilizing this situation, having an attack against Japan, having joined basically forces. And we do not know how Russia would react with this Sino-Russian no border, no limit partnership. So the stakes are really, really high. And as I said, the world is preparing, but I'm a little bit skeptical whether this is enough.
Dr. Matura, regarding the preparations of the international community outside of the so-called Western countries, do you have any take on every other country's position or preparation?
Well, thanks for having me today. It's a really complicated question, and it's a pleasure to join this great panel. Well, to be frank, the preparation of non-Western countries doesn't really matter, because the rest of the world can only react to the situation. What really matters whether we here in Europe can get prepared for this situation. And to second what Ivana just said, I'm also very skeptical about whether we are doing enough here, because the major problem is that we have some general understanding of what a final showdown in the Taiwan Strait may mean to the world economy. All of the estimates range somewhere between $2 to $10 trillion, which is an immense amount of money. It's really based on the scenario, and there are different scenarios. Now, from a European perspective, I think the worst case scenario would be that some kind of conflict is still going on in Ukraine. Europe is still dependent on China, and then a full-scale invasion starts in the Taiwan Strait. Now, the good news is that I don't think that the full-scale invasion is very probable. Some form of naval actions, an on and off blockade or a constant blockade is something that is more probable. But even this lesser evil, if I may say so, would cause something like $2 to $5 trillion of cost to the world economy. Now, there are some estimates about the impact on the American economy. Over there, they are talking about at least a 7% contraction, which is indeed would be twice as much as the contraction caused by COVID-19 or the global financial crisis. But unfortunately, when it comes to Europe, and I think that is a fundamental problem, we don't really see numbers here. Probably it's a little bit complicated to run all of these calculations for 27 member states. There are very rough estimates. For example, some colleagues in the Netherlands have already run some models because they would be very, very affected. But I think that's fair enough if we say that the European economy would be at least as affected as the American. So we are talking about a 7% contraction of the European GDP in the first year of the conflict. And if it's a prolonged conflict, then it's something even more severe. So what we need to do is I think there's a very nice way to put it is a 3D approach that we need to diversify, we need to deter, and we also need to develop. It means that we need to diversify away from China, so to reduce our dependencies, our critical dependencies on China as much as possible, which is actually is deterrence in itself. Besides that, we need to deter China. Of course, Europe is not able to really pose a military deterrence to China, but economic and political deterrence is on the table. And in that regard, Europe has very, very strong cards in this game. And finally, we need to enhance the development of our own critical technologies where we are still dependent on China. So I think this 3D approach is what we have to follow in the European Union. And the rest of the world, once again, they are going to react to whatever happens in China or in the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you. Now I would have some question after the preparation. What would happen if some kind of invasion would occur? Dr. Kohl, what do you think? How would an invasion affect the military political balance of power in the region?
Well, again, very important question. First of all, I think it would make it very clear for whoever still believes that China is rising peacefully, that Beijing is now committed to a different course of action. So peaceful rise of China would no longer be something that is viable as a narrative for China's rise. As a result, China would most certainly find itself in a much more hostile neighborhood. No doubt it would be locked in an arms race with Japan, whose own sense of security would be shaken by the annexation of Taiwan and the PLA deployments next door. Certainly, Japan would seek further security guarantees from the United States under their longstanding defense treaty. And there is also a possibility, and it certainly has the technological capability, that Japan would develop its own nuclear deterrent against China, given the proximity of the PLA to Japan. That in turn would spark a new arms race in the region. That would have a hugely detrimental impact on counterproliferation regimes worldwide, and that would be hugely destabilizing. Beyond Japan, certainly the rest of the region would also feel a lot more apprehensive because China would have made it clear that it is willing to resort to force to resolve what are, diplomatic or political issues. So again, those countries would probably seek assurances from the United States. And as a result, you would have a much greater involvement or presence by U.S. military, which is the exact opposite of what China has been aiming for in recent years, which is to expel the United States from what it regards as its near abroad. That could also make it likelier that we would see the emergence of a Asian NATO or some sort of security architecture that brings together the capabilities of a number of countries surrounding China. So countries like certainly Philippines, Vietnam, India, South Korea, Singapore, all the way to Australia. There would be much greater demand for some sort of consortium to counter Chinese expansionism. And finally, and other speakers have briefly touched on this, even if China were prepared for financial retaliation following an invasion of Taiwan, and certainly the Chinese economy is much more integrated into the international economy than Russia is, China would nevertheless face very severe sanctions and trade restrictions, primarily from G7 countries. And In total, they account for more than 41% of trade for China. So that would certainly have a major impact on the Chinese economy, which in turn would have to rely more greatly on its trade with the global South and non-democratic countries.
What is your take on military consequences of a potential invasion, or how could you affect future military cooperation in the region?
Actually, I thought about 2 points need to be paid attention to. The first is Taiwan is an island, which is quite different from Ukraine. As Russia invaded Ukraine, Ukraine can get any Western countries, democracy partner countries, help from the west border, which is quite a low border alongside with Poland. It's easy, it's convenient, but look at Taiwan as an island. What we need is all from abroad, via the sea or from the air. So it's very critical to Taiwan. Once the invasion did happen, how can we sustain ourselves to keep those supply routes open and secured? Not only by ourselves effort, but also need effort from the like-minded countries, especially from the US later. If you look at the map, from the north, there's Japan. From the south, there's Philippines, which is closest to us, not many far, probably 100 kilometers away. But to the east, it's a very broad ocean. If the US will come to help, that's a long way. So they need to forward deploy all their assets into this 2A region, so the help can come in time. We know there always a question about whether the Ukraine can get assist and help in time enough. We hope that once there's a situation happen in Taiwan, we can get those helps, assistance from others in time. And the other point is I would like to address is about the nuclear threat. We know the reason that Ukraine cannot get help in time is because the nuclear threat of Russia. Just look at China, North Korea, even behind China is Russia. They are all nuclear capable. So we are facing 3 countries which are alongside together, and they have the capability to launch the nuclear threat. And China also currently has the capability to strike the mainland China, mainland USA. So whether those countries around the world, especially in the Indo-Pacific, will be deterred by those kind of threats, we need to think about that. Things just prove in Ukraine war, those threats is not workable at this moment, at least. So hopefully, those countries come to the defense of Taiwan, need to think ahead. Don't waste time. Help need to come in time. Thank you.
Your Excellency, what is the Taiwanese diplomatic strategy to what Dr. Wu said, to have allies help Taiwan in time?
Well, a broader question is, what makes Taiwan so strategically important to the world? Number one, Taiwan is I would say, a top democracy in the world. We just had a successful democratic election, national election earlier this year as the first democracy in the world that completed this kind of democratic transition. Number two, Taiwan, or this single Taiwanese company, TSMC, accounts for more than 90% of advanced chips in the world. That explains why the Americans want TSMC, Japanese want TSMC, German wants TSMC. Last month, TSMC had this groundbreaking ceremony in Dresden, Germany. All the EU leaders, German leaders were all there. I'm so happy that Taiwan can be an essential part of this future European Union's plan to have its own semiconductor autonomies. Taiwan can be part of that, you know. So, and not to mention that Taiwan is a peace-loving country. The reason what I mentioned earlier, that there are so many resolutions, statements, all mentioning about the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, is to send a message to the Chinese leaders that there's no way that Taiwan will fight with the potential Chinese attack. It will be a collective effort by the international community to deter China from making such a provocative actions. It's been, Chinese has introduced a so-called hybrid warfare on Taiwan, and it will do the same things on some countries in the world too. I mean, this hybrid warfare consists legal warfare, military warfare, of course, psychological warfare, and information warfare. Take legal warfare, for example. The most recent cases involved China's attempts to explain this UN resolution 2758 back in 1971 and saying that Taiwan is part of it. In fact, this resolution only explained China, People's Republic of China's international status. It has nothing to do with China's legal status, but it shows that China has launched a comprehensive warfare to the world by undermining Taiwan's international status, by delegitimize Taiwan's democratic elected government, and also by delink Taiwan's security and relationship with the rest of the world, which makes the world, there's an effort for the world to say louder and also in public that Taiwan is very important. So the Biden administration, President Biden said 5 times in public that if China attacks Taiwan, the US does not rule out the possibility of sending troops to defend Taiwan. You know, so I believe if there's a change of government in the US government will maintain the same attitude on Taiwan, because Taiwan has become a indispensable asset to the US and also to the rest of the world.
Thank you. Dr. Karásková, how would the EU react? Would it be able to have a united foreign policy?
Well, you're smiling, so I suspect you already know the answer.
I'm just asking the question.
Well, European Union is trying to diversify. Let's put a credit where it belongs. So there is already an attempt to diversify, to nearshore, to friendshore, and so on. I think we learned to some extent the lesson from COVID-19. But that takes time, and we may not have that time, because the famous saying alleged to Xi Jinping said that in 2027 he would like to solve the Taiwan question. So we may not have the luxury of the time to diversify and to be sure that we are protected. On the military front, it was already mentioned here that we would probably have a bit of difficulties to find a united stance, especially within the NATO. And here it probably would surprise you that Hungary is not the biggest spoiler, that we have to look at France. And to current President Emmanuel Macron, who said that Taiwan is not a European problem, that it should not be solved by Europeans, it's a US problem, and Taiwanese problem in the first place. So that would be a little bit difficult, with France still pushing for national solutions for different things and saying that NATO doesn't have a mandate to look at Indo-Pacific. It should still keep an eye on Atlantic Ocean. So in terms of military, the US would probably work with individual partners, especially those who can project power. Well, here we are back to France once again. So in terms of NATO, very skeptical on united approach in this area. Plus, it would probably be the same situation if we still have Ukraine conflict unresolved, that Russia would step up its efforts in Ukraine, and Europeans would have full hands in Ukraine to deal with that. And that could be the division of the theaters, that Europeans will take care of Ukraine and the US will focus more on Indo-Pacific. In terms of sanctions within the European Union, I think I'm slightly bit more positive that this could be actually reached, depending on the way how we diversify from China. But these sanctions would most likely be bypassed anyway by China. China learned a lesson from the war in Ukraine and how we sanctioned Russians. So there is this possibility. So to wrap it up, on military solutions, less likelihood. On economic front, more likelihood of that, though the effects would be questionable. And of course, China would come up with rolling new initiatives towards Europeans, and we may have the governments who would be far right, for example, in Austria, but in other countries as well. Well, Austria is not part of NATO, but of the EU, who may not be in favor to punishing China while we are already struggling with Russia. So it is interconnected. It's a complicated scenario. And the best situation we should probably aim at is deterrence, basically not make sure that this is actually happening in the first place, because we do not have good solutions.
Thank you. Dr. Matura, I think it would be interesting to talk a bit about the Central Eastern European region, since we are sitting here in Budapest. Well, to put it politely, countries in this region have differing views and policies on Chinese and Taiwanese issue. Do you think that such an event would further divide the region, or how would it affect of our unity?
And you thought, Ivana, you were getting the tough questions here, right? Okay, well, I think it's very important to emphasize that Central and Eastern European countries should be aware that Taiwan is not far away, especially economically speaking. So when it comes to those estimates that try to give you a number of the impact, then many of the Central European countries, including Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Germany in a broader region, are usually at the forefront of the potential victims of the outfall of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. Why? Because of the microchips that the ambassador just mentioned, and through our automotive industry. So practically speaking, it's very easy to understand the higher the share of the automotive industry in the output of an economy, the bigger the impact of a Chinese attack would be. And in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and also in Germany, it's all somewhere between 4.5% to 5% of the GDP, not to mention, you know, the domino effect. So we would be severely impacted simply through the automotive industry, but also through ICT sector, electronics, and so on and so forth. So what I mean here is that Central Europe should play a role in deterrence, for example, or should play a role in putting together a pan-European action plan, how to react to the different scenarios, because this is not a problem that belongs to Germany or the United States or France alone, but it's also our own problem here in Central and Eastern Europe. And I think Taiwan is also a country that understands that. So in the past 2 years, Taiwan has been a major supporter of the war efforts in Ukraine and already provided a lot of humanitarian aid, for example, through Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania to Ukraine. So there is some kind of level of reciprocity. I think if Taiwan understands the importance of Central Europe and geopolitical stability of this region, then we should also understand the importance of their geopolitical stability, no matter how far away Taiwan seems to be.
Well, thank you. We have still a few minutes, so I think we have time for one questions from the audience. If someone has any, I have a lot of them, so I can ask if no one wants to. Yeah, there is a lady.
Hi, my name is Donika Amini, and I'm from Kosovo. So, you know, like being from Kosovo, there is a lot of parallels drawn between then, you know, Russia and China using either Ukraine or Taiwan to challenge the West. So recent meeting between Xi and Vučić in Serbia, there was an explicit reference to Taiwan supporting each other, China supporting Serbia in relation to Kosovo versus, you know, Vučić supporting the Chinese attitude towards Taiwan. How do you interpret that? Because when we are speaking about an EU that is becoming geopolitical, when we are talking about, you know, the sort of war in Ukraine, and the geopolitical context, competition between the West and Russia, where does the China part belong? And how dangerous it is to actually have yet another conflict or hotspot being there with the West not having political capital to deal with?
Yeah, I'm glad to ask this question because despite my my office is in Budapest, but also covers 4 Western Balkan countries, including Kosovo. So I think Tamás was perfectly right earlier that not only a lot more and more countries from the Central Eastern Europe or Baltic have reached out to Taiwan, but even some Balkan countries have also extended their goodwill to Taiwan because of what I've just mentioned, Taiwan's strategic role in the world geopolitics. Definitely, Taiwan is open-minded to engage with as many like-minded partners as possible, including Kosovo or other Balkan countries, in all kinds of fields. You're right that Kosovo shares a similar historical background with Taiwan in terms of our joint fight for a more international space and participation in international organizations. And Taiwan can offer a lot of experience in upgrading your economies, in sharing experience with you how to deter disinformation warfare from Russia or from Serbia. Taiwan can also work closely with Kosovo and other potential Balkan countries to uphold democratic values of democracy. So it's not like Taiwan wants to teach you how to do that, but Taiwan wanted to be a solid and loyal partner to all like-minded countries in the world. Thank you.
Does any of our panelists have take on this question?
Yeah, I'll jump in very quickly.
Sorry.
May I?
Michael, sorry, I didn't see you.
Right. Yeah, following up upon Representative Leo's remarks, I would add that Beijing in recent years has looked on with some apprehension at Taiwan's ability to deepen ties with a series of countries worldwide, mostly democratic countries, notwithstanding the fact that those relationships remained at the unofficial level. But you have seen a consolidation of Taiwan's presence in many areas around the world, and certainly in parts of Europe as well. So China feels it needs to push back against this, and one way by which it can do so is to reach to its own like-minded partners, that is, autocratic regimes and non-democratic states, and truly emphasize what Beijing calls a One China principle. Which positions Taiwan as part of the People's Republic of China. So this is the first phase. The second phase, we're seeing efforts as well by Beijing to compel other governments to move away from their One China policy, which is different from the One China principle, again, as a means to constrain Taiwan's visibility and international presence. So as Taiwan works with like-minded allies to widen and diversify its global presence, China also launches its own countervailing measures, and that means encouraging autocratic regimes to adopt the same language that China has been using to describe Taiwan.
Thank you. We have one other question. Please be as direct as you can because we are running out of time. Thank you.
I'll try to be short. My name is Mikael Hem. I'm a Norwegian journalist. Taiwan has never declared independence and still advocates peaceful unification, at least some politicians. What are the chances of that ever happening, a peaceful unification?
No, the peaceful unification is not current Taiwan government's ultimate goal, or our current policy is that Republic of China, Taiwan is an independent and sovereign country. despite only 12 countries in the world recognize Taiwan as a diplomatic allies of them. But I think Taiwan has been able to deepen and strengthen its substantial relationship with most countries who don't have an official relationship with Taiwan. You know, Taiwan is a free society. Right now, when it comes to national identity, I'm talking about Taiwan identity. People identify themselves as Taiwanese is more than 80%. So this notion of a peaceful unification with China is not in the current Taiwan government's agenda, but it could be one of the views expressed by a Taiwanese citizen.
Well, you're absolutely right that de jure, Taiwan is not a sovereign country. De facto, it is a sovereign country with its own government, president, currency, passports, you name it. So we have to distinguish between what we are actually talking about. As for the peaceful unification, I think that the chances for actually this going forward are very, very low currently. And the reason for that is, of course, the situation of Hong Kong. When China approached Hong Kong with the one country, two systems, there was some kind of, let's say, hope that it would somehow work. We have seen that it didn't work in Hong Kong, that Hong Kong is more and more integrated and basically becoming, it is an integral part of China where the democracy is deteriorating. So it's no longer speaking to a big portion of the Taiwanese population, this notion of peaceful unification. Of course, nobody wishes for a war, so nobody is kind of ditching the idea that there could be some kind of reconciliation in the future, but I think as a concept, it's no longer flying.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention, and please give a round of applause for our panelists.